The power of wind has made its mark on Earth since the beginning of time, turning rock into sand, churning oceans, and repainting the landscape of the sky. The ancient Chinese carefully observed that power, and 2,300 years ago, they invented a way to harness it. Early kites were shaped like birds, but today their designs are limited only by the imagination. The first kites were used by the military to intimidate their enemies and drop messages of propaganda behind enemy walls. There were even stories of kites powerful enough to lift human beings. I went to Weifang, a city in northeast China, in search of traditional handmade kites. The artists make kites in the traditional way. They heat slices of bamboo and shape them into the skeletons of flight. The exotic frames are glued together and covered with a thin layer of silk, which becomes the skin of the kite. But it's the bright acrylic paint that brings the silk dragon heads to life. This kite is more than 100 feet long, with approximately one disc per foot.
Very strong.
Segmented kites like this generate more lift because each segment adds wind resistance, so that even a mild gust can easily lift this monstrous dragon. But the most important lesson the ancient Chinese learned from kite technology was how to ride the wind.
For the greater part of the history of sailing, the technology of Chinese sailboats has been drastically superior to anything that any Westerner had. Much of that superiority lay in the sails. This is called a batten sail. The battens are the strips of bamboo, and the advantage of them is that they give mariners great flexibility. If the wind is strong, they can only raise one or two battens. If the wind is weak, they can raise them all.
The parallel battens keep the sail from billowing out too far and losing thrust. Another revolutionary innovation was aligning pivoting sails along the axis of the boat, so they could catch the wind from different directions.
In the West, sails tended to be at right angles with the boat, and that meant they could only sail properly when the wind was behind them. But with this, you could sail with the wind in 3/4. If it looks familiar, that's because every modern Western yacht you've seen has copied this design.
The West borrowed other Chinese maritime innovations: rudders to steer ships, leeboards to reduce downwind drift, and watertight compartments to keep boats afloat, even if the hull was breached. Chinese officials in court rituals faced the emperor just as the other stars faced the North Star. So they built their imperial palaces with the throne room facing south. From the palace to the sprawling empire at its feet, imperial cities like Kaifeng were built on a precise north-south axis. The ancient Chinese invented something to guide them in finding north-south lines: the magnetic compass.
Originally, compasses pointed not north, but south, and the original compasses looked like this. By the 4th century BC, Chinese alchemists had discovered the properties of lodestone, a naturally occurring magnetic material which, if left free to spin, would align itself with the Earth's magnetic field.
These early compasses were called south pointers because the spoon-shaped lodestone always pointed south. Chinese sailors found the compass indispensable on water. By the 12th century, large fleets of Chinese junks were roaming the Earth, sailing as far as Africa.
Before it could be used on a ship, the south pointer needed a little finessing. It'll work fine on a perfectly calm day, but with a little wind or a little bucking of the deck, it'll swing around wildly and it's next to useless. Now at some point, someone figured out that you can use a lodestone to magnetize a plain, ordinary piece of iron. If you take an iron needle, rub it with a magnet, it will behave exactly as a lodestone would. If you then stick that needle through a piece of bamboo, float it in a bowl of water, you have, in effect, a modern compass. It will align itself north to south. Now, it might not look like much, but with this, you don't need the sun and the stars. No matter how dark and stormy the night, no matter how bad the weather, you can always find your way home.